As I understand it, Dennis is joining us. I'd be happy to say hello to him. Dennis, hi, good afternoon. I almost said good morning.
Hello, good morning works too. It's 11 a.m. for me. What about you?
Well, yes, how's the weather in Africa, Denny?
Is it hot?
It's hot. Even here today, it's already hot here. Over 20 degrees, which, by the way, is an unusual, unreal situation for Vancouver. And about Ukraine today, how real is what's happening there? The change of leaders. Well, this morning I managed, Dennis, to quickly glance through it, barely, because it's hard to keep up with you. Something changes every day. One person replaces another. As soon as you learn one last name, there's already a new one. I want to ask you, they changed again today, and why?
I haven't seen anyone being replaced in their positions. And today in Ukraine, even if someone were to be replaced in some position, nothing would change. Nothing will change with this president. It's just one last name replacing another within the old, rotten, corrupt system.
No, a gangster one. But tell me, please, today when you open social networks, everywhere you read about the Mindich tapes. I want to ask you, what is actually going on with these tapes? Is this a real investigation, or as people are asking, is it just someone's leak? Why are these recordings, if they're so important and necessary, being released in parts? Who decides what gets published and what doesn't? Are people being shown the truth, or is it some kind of filtered version of events?
No, this is called political pressure. It's a method of political struggle. In my opinion, and I think it's pretty obvious, these tapes are being leaked by NABU itself through friendly media outlets and members of parliament. Basically, I call this the Soros crowd. This organization, one way or another, is connected with Soros-linked organizations, and now they're attacking Zelensky. I'm not sure what these attacks are aiming for. There are many theories. From the interest of a certain Tom Shafiala, Soros' best partner in Ukraine, who wants to take over this business, Firepoint, to a global war against Zelensky. We shouldn't forget that NABU is overseen by a person from the FBI who was appointed here by Trump's team. In general, it's quite a web. I can tell you one thing. Of course, everything we hear, you hear as well. It's presented in pieces. Today, another part of the tapes was released. That's the absolute truth. These are real recordings.
Dennis, tell me let me ask differently. Who benefits from releasing these recordings in this format, in parts and not in full? Who? Thank you.
Yes, as I told you, it's not a question of whether it's beneficial or not. It's a methodology, a tactic of conducting political struggle and applying pressure. Oh, you're not listening? Well, here's some more for you. Can't hear? Well, here's some more. And kind of a heads up in advance, if you keep doing whatever you're doing, like I said, I don't know their ultimate goal, then you'll hear this. For example, former press secretary of Zelensky, Yulia Mendel, wrote that Zelensky's wife and Zelensky himself are on the tapes.
When we made the announcement about the conversation with you, the main question, according to the author, is if there's nothing critical in these tapes, in these recordings, why hide all of this? I mean, why not show them? So what I mean is, as I understand it, you said you've listened to them and that it's true. So I'm asking you, Dennis, how do you know it's true?
I know it's true because these are documents and this is the work of NABU. I know how it was done. And I have no reason to believe that it's not true. And just think about how stupid and dangerous it would be to publish something untrue. What, you mean made up? I'll tell you this, even if I didn't know anything, I know the people on the tapes, I can tell by the way they talk that it's real, it's true. As for why not everything at once, I'll tell you again, it's because if you release everything at once, people will forget it all in 3 days. But this way, you deal damage every day, you lower Zelensky's rating and so on. In other words, the negativity is delivered in portions. If this is a matter of fighting, it should be delivered in portions. If they wanted to dump negative information on Zelensky, then of course he would need to dump everything at once, not stretch it out. Political strategies suggest delivering positivity gradually and negativity all at once. But here it's reversed. The opponents deliver negativity in small doses.
Yeah. Do you think, Dennis, that this is specifically about undermining Zelensky, and how successful do you think it could be or not?
Of course, specifically. I would like to believe that this is about undermining Zelensky, but these recordings have already been published for a week. And what? People go out into the streets, they keep going and live as best they can because they've been made to feel doomed, they've been psychologically crushed, and that's it. For many, it's just another psychological phenomenon, or perhaps professionals like psychiatrists and psychologists should explain it. That is, for other people who somehow supported Zelensky or didn't understand that the war needs to end, they found themselves in a situation where if they admit that Ukraine is run by Zelensky's organized crime group and Firepoint and that the war is his business, then their whole worldview collapses, the one they made up for themselves. That this is an existential war, that Zelensky really wants peace and Putin doesn't, that everything is going well and as it should, but in reality, their whole world will completely collapse. They can't allow themselves to do that, so they either keep ignoring it or just brushing it off. Overall, the situation is complicated since in any other country this would lead to impeachment proceedings against the president and widespread resignations. Can you imagine the head of the National Security and Defense Council of a country at war is sitting in an apartment with the president's friend, discussing who should go into which office, who should be appointed where, up to and including the ambassador to the US, from Ukraine to the US, who to appoint, who gets what. Money, fantastic amounts, $8 billion for drones. $8 billion, if anyone in the Western world hears us now, mainly people living here, they understand what kind of money that is, even here. And this is a country at war, a former Soviet country, and this is taxpayers' money from Europe, the US, and Canada as well. The West is giving Zelensky a lot of money. They're funding Zelensky's business? I've probably said this on your show for the 5th time now, but tell me, please, if the people sitting at the negotiating table with the Russians or the Americans are doing business on this war, how can they be motivated to want to end this war? Obviously, they will sabotage the ceasefire, which I've talked about on every one of your shows, who really doesn't want peace. Now you're hearing and seeing all the proof.
Dennis, how many people are there in Ukrainian society today, the kind you just mentioned, who, for example, believe that Putin doesn't want to stop the war, but Zelensky still does somehow? Are there still people like that, or are there none left?
Yes, I think it's about 40%, and out of that 40%, not all of them necessarily like Zelensky. They just understand the situation the way they see it. About 60% understood everything with no reservations.
But if about 60% understood and 40% didn't, still 60 is more than 40. What could this lead to? A coup or what?
I rule out any revolutions or coups because we can see, for example, in Russia, how people are suppressed there, politically speaking. You can't do anything because the system has already grown so much. The grip is so tight that you simply have no room to maneuver. You go out into the street, a police van pulls up, and they detain you. In Ukraine, if you're a man and you do something like that, the same police van will show up. By the way, they've bought a lot more of them. That's a well-known public tender. They'll detain you, send you to the front, and even put you in an assault brigade. That's it. Women may go out, especially those whose husbands died in the war. They're treated somewhat better, but I've heard they're told not to give interviews or even consider it. And if a woman has any man in her life who could potentially end up at the front, of course, she'll be afraid to do it. The only thing that could make women start taking drastic action, in my opinion, is, of course, conscripting women and lowering the draft age to 18. Women, of course, won't let their children, already 18, still children, be sent to the front. But then terrible events will follow. I think they've done this sociological research and they have these 2 red lines. Everything else is fair game for them. Well, look, they're showing the whole world, the whole country, that the president's friend Vova is mentioned on the tapes there. Right now, people are dying, mothers are crying, and others are building homes and palaces and having discussions during the war. And here, let's say they need to plant some trees there. They're complaining that they have to freeze this construction because the tapes about Bull have surfaced. What is this even? These are just immoral people, first of all, just immoral, regardless of any personal likes or dislikes. They're simply immoral people. And secondly, there's a war going on. If anyone believes this will bring success, I've been saying for 5 years, it'll only cause disaster. If everyone is okay with everything, you understand.
Isn't what is happening in Ukraine today already a disaster?
A disaster, but not an apocalypse. When the apocalypse comes, then there simply won't be any way back. Today, there still is. Today, we still have about 3 or 4 months left to stop this situation.
And why 3 or 4 months, Dennis?
Well, that's just my rough estimate, using certain, if you can call them that, methods and monitoring, in my subjective opinion, of course,
Point of view.
the level of tension in society. I see what stage society is at right now. I see how the whole operation is being run, how propaganda works. In 4 or 5 months, let's put it this way, in 6 months, it will already be impossible to bring people together. That is, there will already be 2 or 3 camps ready to go against each other to the death. If they get weapons tomorrow, it could spark a civil war.
Do you mean that 60-40 split?
60 and 40, and out of those groups, there could be people who have even more radical views. So imagine, one huge part of society thinks that the Russian language shouldn't be touched, that we shouldn't join NATO, shouldn't join the EU, and shouldn't touch religion. We need to end the war. We need to live with the goal of economic prosperity and focus on constructive development. And the other part is fixated on the war and believes that all of life should be devoted to war. But at the same time, most of them, of course, will not go to war and are not going.
When you say, one more question, when you say fixated on the war, do you think this is a person's genuine state of mind?
Under the influence of propaganda, but it's quite sincere. But do you remember that famous photograph when during the time everyone is giving the Nazi salute to Hitler and one man doesn't raise his hand? You see what the situation is? Right now, this crowd is infected, and I don't want to compare them, of course, with Nazis and fascists, but the methods are the same. In the Third Reich, in Russia, in Ukraine, it's the same propaganda. Now, it's even harder because you must overcome information technologies like social networks, but I have to say they're handling it well. That's why people have been convinced that the whole world revolves around this. That, well, everyone forgot that Ukraine was not a successful country. Zelensky's approval rating dropped to 0 a month before the war, showing he failed as president, but the war saved him politically. Everyone forgot this. It's not like Ukraine was flourishing, everything was skyrocketing, and then Putin attacks and ruins everything for us, all the reforms. There were no reforms. Everything was going downhill. If Putin hadn't attacked in February 2022 or hadn't attacked at all, Zelensky would no longer be president by June. The well-known oligarchs' conspiracy was against him. Even Dmitry Gordon, our so-called favorite, you can find it, watch it, it's all online. He insulted Zelensky with the harshest words. He made a video recording, addressed the US embassy, the British embassy. I'm being followed. Zelensky wants to kill me, put me in jail. Do you get it? That's how it was in Ukraine.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. I would like to briefly return to the second part of these newly published conversations. I just want to clarify something because maybe not everyone knows what we're talking about. As I understand it, the name Vova already appears there. It's clear that it's probably not referring to Vladimir Putin, but still. And you mentioned friends of Volodymyr Zelensky, but let's clarify that it was actually Mindich who was sitting in his own apartment with Mr. Umerov, who is a government official and in fact was essentially running the country. He was recommending who should be moved where, who should be appointed to which position. Honestly, it looked, to put it mildly, quite strange. That's putting it mildly. Dennis, well, I would still like to clarify about Firepoint because not everyone knows what it is. It's a Ukrainian company that, as I understand it, manufactures missiles. So what exactly is tied to it? Could you be a bit more specific?
Firepoint is a Ukrainian company that produces missiles, drones, and all sorts of other weapons, but primarily drones. There are sort of frontmen, there are real co-owners, but basically everything, and this is mentioned on the recordings, everything leads to Zelensky. Everything leads to Zelensky, of course. Mindich is one of the key people at Firepoint, and he basically manages the whole process. Umerov obviously has a share, since they're discussing selling it to the Arabs. And you cash out, exit, and split this money. It's hundreds of millions of dollars. They already value the company itself at billions of dollars. That's why this production matters so much. That's why Zelensky is in Bahrain today and was in Yerevan yesterday. This trip of his around the world, he's like a sales manager, P.T. Barnum, traveling and selling his production while serving as the president of Ukraine. That's it, his own goods. And of course, war is beneficial for him, no doubt about it.
And what do you think, Dennis, after all? Is it really, let's say, Ukraine? And in reality, it's not Zelensky who is in charge, but well, let's say someone like Mindich, it doesn't matter if it's Mindich or someone else, but not Zelensky himself. He's really the kind of person you can, so to speak, send somewhere to the West just to get some more grants or more loans and so on and so on. In other words, being the money man, so to speak, didn't mean he was the one making the decisions. And everything in the country accordingly happens regardless of what he wants.
No, that's not it. Zelensky runs Ukraine. Let me just explain to you how things are happening right now. So, there's Ukraine, it has its own internal affairs and problems, and there are some external issues as well. Zelensky focuses solely on foreign policy. Well, it's an absolute failure, but everyone thinks it's amazing. In reality, it's a complete failure. But that's what he's doing. What's happening inside Ukraine? I read that in the past month, he spent only 4 days in Ukraine. For 27 days. 26 of them, he wasn't in the country. And before that, Yermak was inside, and now Yermak is really running things there. Everything has been handed over to these Yermaks, Mindichs, Umarovs, all his buddies. They're the ones running things inside. So what's actually going on there? In over 4 years, he hasn't addressed the people or explained how they're supposed to live. He hasn't explained where we're going, the plan to end the war, or what happens afterward. It's like we're not supposed to live. That's it. Ukraine is just one big trench and people are told to go fight. But only you, not me. He thinks only about himself, not Mindich. Let's talk about Umarov separately. Umarov's family are US citizens. I suspect, and I have every reason to believe, that Umarov himself is a US citizen. He owns houses, real estate, and more in Florida. Tell me, if the center of your vital interest is not in Ukraine, how can you hold such a high position? Before this, he was the Minister of Defense. And by the way, those recordings you hear are from when Umarov was the Minister of Defense. So he had direct leverage over the allocation of money, where it went to whom, and control over these financial flows. Why would he want peace in Ukraine, reforms in Ukraine, or Ukraine's prosperity? Even Mindich says, if something happens there now, just hold on for another year, then go to America. They're already talking about what they'll open there. Can you imagine? So where do Ukraine and Ukrainians fit into this?
Dennis, well, you mentioned roughly, you gave numbers of those who, while still in Ukraine, support Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, let's say roughly 40%, right? Still, what do you think? Are these people who really, well, I don't believe that people don't understand what's happening, right? Because, well, for example, if we draw an analogy with Russia, people there understand what Putin is doing, right? And I'm more than sure that the ratings that are being published today by SOMI supposedly are falling. They've been falling for a long time and are much lower. That's it. But obviously, people can't do anything about it. You've already said why. Is it possible to compare, let's say, the conditions of people living in Ukraine with the conditions of people living in Russia? It's impossible to look out from behind the hill or you'll get hit on the head.
Well, let me correct you. I said 40% support the war. The war. Not all of these 40% support Zelensky, but some do. So Zelensky's rating is about 15-20% today. Yes, it's just a mirror situation. I was on a broadcast yesterday and I said that Putin is a role model for Zelensky. Well, it's a mirror situation to what's happening in Russia. I've said this many times. When building a dictatorship, there's a point where if you let it go too far, there's no way back. The point of no return. Do you remember in Russia about 12 years ago there were some protests, something like Bolotnaya Square?
Some kind of debate, something like that.
Some kind of political process, something like that. I remember back then even Pugacheva supported Prokhorov. Currently, this doesn't exist, just as it doesn't in Ukraine. Here's another important point that happened. He imposed sanctions, like the ones on the late Gennady Balashov and now on Andrei Bogdan. This is Yermak's predecessor, his first chief of staff who personally brought him to power. He personally brought him to power. Now he's imposing sanctions on him. You can't impose sanctions on your own citizens at all, except in one case, terrorism, if you're not involved in terrorism. So, Bogdan spoke out today. He's an experienced lawyer, and he said that everyone will be punished. Everyone will face criminal penalties. He claims the sanctions were for fighting corruption, not being corrupt. They suffered. I suspect Bogdan is involved in leaking the tapes. That's how it ended up. Currently, most viewers are from the former Soviet Union and now live around the world, including Canada, the US, Israel, and other countries. Tell me, how does it work when a president who is clearly mired in corruption just goes ahead and imposes sanctions on someone? How does that even make sense? So he can just wake up on the wrong side of the bed and sign sanctions?
Well, the main question here is, as I understand it, Yermak still lives in Ukraine.
The person who, well,
Let's put it this way. In my opinion, there are a lot more questions for him than for Bodan. But sanctions have been imposed on Bodan and not on Yermak. And even as I understand it, there aren't even any suspicions. That is, the person walks around completely freely and, so to speak, continues to be in charge. This, of course, also raises huge questions. And to be honest,
I don't understand.
why these questions aren't being raised so loudly. In Ukraine, I mean, of course.
and who is going to raise these questions? Yermak has now installed himself as head of the Ukrainian Bar Association there. Just don't laugh. He's always going to the front. And for some reason, well, I'm being ironic here, the military take pictures with him. He says he's going to help the military, tells them to reach out to him. That's why he created this legal organization. If the state wronged you, didn't pay you, or something happened, we'll defend your rights. It's an insult, a mockery.
You just said, Dennis, that Zelensky is more involved in foreign policy than domestic. And you even mentioned the number of days in a month. He was in Ukraine only 3 or 4 days. And many people think that his foreign policy is, well, relatively successful. Well, how can you call it successful if his relationship with Trump is far from the best, and Trump is, after all, the president of the United States? And the relationship with Israel, now there's this grain story, though I'm not sure we can discuss it. It's also unclear what's going on. Where is the success in foreign policy, Dennis?
You know how people judge it? If they give us loans, if we get loans, it means our foreign policy is successful. But that depends on people's grasp of life in general, of how a state is built. So, if they gave a loan, it was to Ukraine, a country at war, not to Zelensky. They would have done the same for any president. Another thing is that Zelensky found this golden loophole, became an arms baron, and in Europe they offer, I give you cheap drones, you give me protection, you give me money for the war with Putin. You see? But it's Europe that's paying Zelensky for drones, for cheap labor with one hand. And with the same hand, they're saying that Putin needs to be stopped. With their left hand, they give Putin money for energy resources. I don't understand anything.
Dennis, the way you're explaining it now, it sounds like a marketplace, you know? This isn't like selling radishes. For example, when Zelensky was in the Oval Office, when there were relations with Trump, that incident happened. I've always thought that this isn't just a relationship between, say, you and me or you and Dennis. This is diplomacy, politics. There's a whole country behind him. It's a responsibility. So all this haggling, people also see how it all looks.
The world is set up like this today. It's not the same world as even 20 or 25 years ago, as you can see. Back then, things like this would have been unimaginable and definitely wouldn't have happened. Remember the war in Georgia, which ended in about 5 days. It's unbelievable this could happen now. It needs to end quickly. But today Europe is shouting, end it in Iran immediately. Why did Trump and Israel attack Iran, you scoundrels? For some reason, they're not interested in ending the war in Ukraine and just keep saying to continue. You see? And now many representatives of the European Union openly say, even Narst himself said that there is one advantage to this war. We have time to rearm and solve our own problems. The cynicism is already at an extreme level, like level 100. No one has ever seen anything like this. But if Zelensky respected Ukraine and Ukrainians, if he truly loved them, he would never allow people to talk about Ukraine like that and use Ukraine as a shield, as a proxy, as a bulletproof vest. This is why Ursula called Ukraine a steel porcupine. That's just absolute nonsense. Nobody even asked the people if they wanted to be Europe's bulletproof vest or not. If that's all, I've always said this. If Putin is bad, I agree. Then let's go all the way and be really tough about it. Not even in the sense that NATO should attack Russia. Real sanctions, but it hurts their own economy, so they don't want to do it. They don't want to send their people to the front, and they're right for obvious reasons. But Ukraine is basically okay. And now we're coming to the next problem. Migrants from developing countries are being brought into Ukraine. Officials claim 400 million migrants must be brought to Ukraine and they're already arriving. What's going on? The mayor of Ivano-Frankivsk is a fascist. I'm being honest. Ivano-Frankivsk is in western Ukraine. The mayor is a fascist. He harasses everyone about the language. No Russian allowed. Displaced people who suffered from Putin's rockets in other Ukrainian cities are being expelled from the city. Well, people speak Russian, just like half the population of Ukraine. So he's persecuting them there. He tries to say nasty things. Now builders from India are already coming to Ivano-Frankivsk. Well, now go teach the Indians Ukrainian.
It's mostly India, right, Denny?
It's India, it's Bangladesh, it's Pakistan. And now they say there will also be people from South America, like Colombians. And just what will come out of all this? Look, I always explain my position to people so they don't get the wrong idea. If Ukrainians were as wealthy as Americans or Canadians, and since Americans generally avoid construction or taxi jobs, newcomers would definitely take those positions instead. It could be a Mexican, Cuban, or someone from a post-Soviet country due to the country's economic level. If Ukraine reaches that point, we should rely on checks and verification. But if we're saying that a Ukrainian ends up in a coffin, or at best in emigration, and their children are already learning foreign languages and absorbing foreign cultures, they're growing up as Poles, Spaniards, Germans, and Africans are being brought into Ukraine, and now it's Africa. By the way, let me correct myself. Budana spoke and said that number one is Africa. Africans will be brought in. These cultures are incompatible. We are a civilization, but they are not the same at all. You see, something is going wrong. This has nothing to do with common sense. I will categorically oppose this. But if these processes have already started, then later, if a reasonable person comes to power, of course, all this will have to be fixed. But Ukraine will not find success in such a scenario.
Dennis, I'll read you a comment. From your point of view, Dennis, who is actually robbing the Ukrainian people and the country? And where do these thieves, some of them, live now? And the answer is Israel. This refers to Mindich, of course, but also to Jews in general. This is a question for you. Who is robbing the Ukrainian people? It's clear who's there. The answer is kind of Jews, Israel, in this case, Mindich.
Well, look, Zelensky and his crew have really damaged the reputation of Jews in Israel. But before that, there was President Poroshenko. He had other people there. I can name the surnames Kononenko, Svinarchuk, pure Ukrainians. They were doing the same things, and they would be doing it today. Before that, there was President Yanukovych, who practically had no Jews on his team. Only Russians. What next? What next? Are you going to let Africans feed off Ukraine today, or whoever you like more? Mongols, they'll be the same. It's a matter of the system.
Oh, by the way, Dennis, I heard an interesting version just yesterday that supposedly due to the worsening relations between Ukraine and Israel, but we should probably talk a bit about this grain scandal. Yes, supposedly Israel might even hand over Mindich. Well, let's put it this way, as a jab at Vladimir Zelensky over his policy toward Israel. What do you think? How likely is this?
0%.
0%.
No chance. I think Mindich already made a deal with the FBI. I think Mindich has done it a long time ago. He just has no other way out. And I think Merov has too. I don't just think so, but I'm not going to say it on air. Let's just say I suspect that both Merov and Mindich have made a deal with the FBI, gave everyone up, and leaked everything. And then the situation will just develop somehow. Mindich will never be extradited to Ukraine. It's impossible.
All right, there's another version I've heard that it was Mindich who released the second part of those tapes. But not Mindich himself, of course, but through that correspondent who interviewed him in Israel. Supposedly by accident, but in reality, it was all not accidental at all. As I understand it, they released it through Ukrainska Pravda. So the idea is that Mindich himself is doing this. How would you comment on that? Have you heard about this, and what are your thoughts?
Yes, I read about this specifically from Andrei Bogdan. It was Bogdan who posted this kind of logical chain on his page, arguing that everything leads to the conclusion that it's Mindich leaking everything. Right now, today, I'm not ready to say that I think so, but it's far from an unrealistic scenario. If he's really making a deal, then it's quite possible he's doing this now. And that's how the war against Zelensky is being waged, among other things. Let's not forget, President Trump gave Zelensky an ultimatum at Mar-a-Lago. You must announce elections in Ukraine by mid-June. Not hold them, but announce them. There's only 1 month and 1 week left. Nothing is leading to that or moving in that direction. Trump is about to face the midterm elections. Other problems, everything is different. There's also the situation in Iran. Now, I think there will be a second round, so everything is very complicated. This may be one element of this war and the pressure being applied.
Ask Dennis about this grain deal. What is it? Why did the Jews steal Ukraine's grain? Well, something like that. Dennis, can you talk a little about this topic?
Stolen or not, first of all, no one stole anything from anyone. Putin stole the grain. Putin stole grain from Ukraine during the war. Putin is trading it illegally. Ukraine is accusing Israel of buying this, let's call it black market grain, and bringing it to Israel. The head of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said if you suspect this, submit an official request with documents and inquiries and we'll resolve it civilly. Instead of that, our head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Sibiga, went on social media and wrote an angry post, already accusing Israel as if it were a proven fact. That's not how you treat partner and friendly countries. That's how you handle certain enemies. That's our foreign policy in a nutshell. So why should we quarrel? If Israel, for example, did something like that, then contact them through your own channels, clarify things, take some action, explain that it's wrong. But if you immediately go on social media without any evidence, then I think that's wrong towards a friendly state.
And from your point of view, to be honest, is Israel a friendly state towards Ukraine, and is Ukraine a friendly state towards Israel?
Well, that's generally considered to be the case. But in terms of actions, no.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, Dennis, can we say that Zelensky, Mindich, and Kolomoisky are one team and that they're against everyone else?
They used to be one team. Mindich is Kolomoisky's associate. Zelensky is Kolomoisky's associate. They were all... Mindich co-owned Kvartal 95. That's it. Yes, before they were, you could say, one team. Zelensky's presidency, all of this, as we can see, is just like the classic scenario. You see, Zelensky acts just like Putin. Kolomoisky is like Berezovsky. By the way, Kolomoisky has just been served a new charge that carries up to 12 years in prison. Now, Mindich, believe me, before long, if Mindich really cuts a deal or behaves in a way Zelensky doesn't like, and I was told that Mindich is not the kind of guy who will put up a tough fight. That is, if you tell him he's going to jail, he'll give everyone and everything up. That's right.
Dennis, and what about the role of another oligarch, Mr. Akhmetov, who, again, recently, or at least during the war, bought a yacht for $500 million and is also buying some houses for hundreds of millions of dollars? That's his business. He's an oligarch and can likely afford it. But the issue is it's happening during the war. His closeness, at least with the administration of the president of Ukraine, taking pictures together and so on and so on. How do you assess Akhmetov's role specifically?
Akhmetov was also photographed with another member of Zelensky's team, with Shefir, who also left and who is also on the tapes.
Well,
how can I put this? I have no complaints against Akhmetov. I mean, if he bought the most expensive apartment in the world, which is in Monaco, for €500 million. If it's a question of ethics, I don't allow myself to post some beautiful photo from Miami on Instagram. I have only 6 photos from there in 3.5 years of being there. Because, the people who are watching have a different situation and I'm not in that position myself and Ukraine isn't in that position either. Akhmetov, well, that's a question of ethics. I wouldn't do that. Everything else is within his rights. He's an oligarch. He's a businessman. If an official allows himself to be corrupted, Akhmetov uses him like, a prostitute for money. Nothing more, nothing less. It's not a question of Akhmetov being the architect of something. If it's profitable for him, he does it. If it's not profitable, he doesn't. He's a very pragmatic person, by the way.
What do you think, Dennis, who actually oversees Zelensky, Putin, Trump, or do they make decisions on their own after all?
No, these are all completely different things. Putin is KGB. Trump is something else entirely. He's anti-Soros. So Zelensky is opportunistic. At first, he tried to side with Putin, but something didn't work out there. Then he submitted to the globalists. Now, as we can see, that's not working out either. I've often thought British intelligence plays a major role there. I'm convinced that Zelensky and Yermak have been compromised by British intelligence, MI6, I'm just convinced. I mentioned this in passing once, I just don't want to go deeper into it.
Continuation. Dennis, how would you comment, let's say, on what's happening today on Russian territory? These are endless, practically daily strikes on oil refineries, factories are burning, and there's the environmental situation. That includes, the Urals already, yes, there's burning there, and also the south of Russia, and so on and so on. So how do you assess this? In your opinion, how productive is it really?
I spoke with experts on this issue outside Ukraine specifically to understand it. And they explained to me, yes, the drones reached their targets. Yes, the footage is very dramatic. You saw the black smoke. It's just like the apocalypse. If you look at the footage, it looks like all of Russia is burning. Unceasing rains.
Yes.
Yes, actually, Dennis, after 4 or 5 days, a week at most, they've repaired everything and it all keeps working. But on social media, everything has already gone viral. Look, how much damage to Russia? Yes. Would this damage make Russia end the war? Definitely not.
Don't you think, Dennis, that Ukraine's rude diplomacy towards Israel might have started when the Jews sheltered Mindich?
I don't see the connection. It wasn't the Jews who sheltered Mindich. He's an Israeli citizen, and Israel doesn't extradite its own citizens. So people want to see some kind of conspiracy, some kind of collusion. No, it's just the way things are.
Well, here's the next question. Why didn't Israel arrest and extradite Mindich to Ukraine if Israel and Ukraine are friends?
Israel doesn't extradite its citizens except in rare cases involving serious crimes committed within its territory. Including that, I don't think Mindich broke the law on the territory of Israel.
Do you believe there will be a strike, Dennis, on May 9th? Well, on Moscow, let's be honest, on the parade.
You see, they did all this on purpose. Today, Zelensky has already kind of announced a truce, and now we'll see if Putin breaks it, then yes, on May 9th, they'll strike somewhere. If they strike, it won't target Putin, since it's clear there's an agreement that neither Zelensky, Putin, nor their inner circles will be killed.
Well, yes, especially since I understand that Putin has already warned, saying that if anything happens, there will be an immediate strike on the center of Kyiv.
You know what I'm worried about? I'm worried that Putin will lose his temper and there will end up being a nuclear strike. That's what it all comes down to. I'm sure that if Russia faces a real threat, a truly serious threat, Putin will use it. If we could take back Crimea and that process was already underway, Putin would definitely use it. It's just that many of our people don't understand this. They think that some weirdo with nuclear weapons will just sit and watch as something he considers his own is taken away from him. That won't happen. Whether we like it or not, that simply won't happen, objectively.
Actually, to be honest, I really do have that feeling. Why? Well, I personally do. Because all of this is really, I apologize for the cynicism, dragging on for too long. For example, by the way, I wanted to ask you as well to confirm this. I don't. Supposedly, not around Kyiv, but on the approaches to Kyiv, some crazy defensive structures have been built with underground passages, some kind of bunkers, and so on and so forth, which basically makes Kyiv itself impregnable. And we see that indeed, I think the Russian military perfectly understands that Ukraine can't be taken just like that anymore. And these, like now, these memes, these little victories or conquering something every day, well, it's really just ridiculous. And I'm afraid that this time limit, this inability to make some big move could also lead to what you mentioned, blowing a fuse.
Yes, I suggest you take it off the agenda entirely. Putin won't be able to take all of Ukraine no matter how much he wants to, and Kyiv isn't even being discussed. At best, under the most favorable circumstances, he might be able to take most of the left bank in a few years. That's something he could do. But you know, I just sat down and thought about it, and it's scary to say, but it turns out that a tactical nuclear strike would actually be very beneficial for everyone. That is, Putin demonstrates his power. Europe, it gives Europe a free hand regarding Putin and Ukraine as well. They can stop giving loan money. It gives Trump a free hand. Look at this lawlessness. Now we can act even more harshly. It's really scary, and I know that I was the first to talk about this, and then it came out in official reports. I know that many Europeans privately call Ukraine a buffer. It's a country, it's a buffer. And basically, they don't really care if migrants work in this buffer. For them, it's some kind of unfamiliar territory. This really bothers me, and I strongly disagree with it. But that's exactly how many of them, though not all, feel about it.
Continuation. So, Dennis, what about the fate of those 90 billion that, as I understand it, Hungary approved? But what happens next? I mean, will this money really reach Ukraine? Because I heard something that, in fact, their fate is quite uncertain.
First of all, the fate is uncertain. And secondly, of the 90 million, 60 stays behind. According to the documents, you took 90, but only 30 will actually reach the accounts. 60 stays with Europe's defense industry, which will supposedly produce weapons for Ukraine. You see, I gave this example. It's like someone took out a loan for a new Mercedes in your name, but you were given, I don't know, a 1990 Toyota Corolla to drive, yet you're paying as if it's a new Mercedes. That's basically the kind of scheme that was implemented. And 30 billion euros. I know people might not understand when I say this, but that's peanuts. Because the war today costs about $60 billion a year. So that's why, and what am I getting at with these 30 social benefits need to be paid? Previous debts need to be settled. Social benefits, pensions, salaries for the military. And of course, Firepoint, that's sacred. Put money into Firepoint.
Ask Dennis what Chrystia Freeland is doing in Ukraine. Thank you.
I don't know.
I think nobody knows that, Dennis, only you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Dennis, your turn. I'm still here. I want to ask Dennis. I don't know who Dihibko is. Dihibko?
Dihibko. Yeah.
He was appointed by someone this morning, right, Dennis?
Denis Gudanov made him a non-staff advisor.
Is he from the old political school, or who is he?
Yes. Well, Dihibko himself is a former Komsomol member who quickly became a capitalist, one of the biggest businessmen in Ukraine. He's been in politics, let me think, since the 90s.
Well, okay, Dennis, if this person was, let's say, an active politician 20 years ago, for example, how relevant are his approaches to politics for today's modern Ukraine?
I'll explain to you they are relevant for Ukraine to somehow keep existing. Look, this morning I wrote in my Telegram channel that Gudanov is following in Zelensky's footsteps. Zelensky hired that very same Bogdan we mentioned today, since Bogdan is an experienced bureaucrat. And when Bogdan gave his famous interview to Gordon, which I recommend everyone to watch, it's 4 hours long. In that interview, he said, I always kind of criticized Zelensky and said, we need experienced bureaucrats. That phrase really stuck in my head. I still remember it because it struck me. It just drives me crazy. We don't need any experienced bureaucrats. And in the end, these experienced bureaucrats were the ones who got Bogdan sanctioned. And now Gudanov is following the same path. He hired the experienced bureaucrat, Dihibko. But this won't get Ukraine out of the crisis. It's not ideology. It's not a new idea. Obviously, Ukraine needs completely different views, a 180-degree turn, a fresh start. And for that, we need ideology, and the boldest decisions and reforms. Dihibko won't do that. He'll just show him the old rotten system, how to maintain it, how to run it, how to be in charge of it. Basically, he'll show that perfectly. I don't argue with that.
For some reason, I remember when Bogdan was saying that he wasn't exactly warning Volodymyr Zelensky, but he was asking him not to go too far with Putin. But it seems like he didn't listen to him. And in his opinion, Andriy Bodan's opinion, he still went too far. And Bogdan actually strongly advised against it. He even asked him not to do it, but to be very careful.
Yes, Bogdan even said it directly. He said in that interview that Zelensky double-crossed Putin.
Yes.
I don't know
what it means, so to speak.
So I wanted to ask, what does it mean?
Well, I can only suspect that when they flew to Oman and met with Patrushev there, most likely Zelensky took on some obligations, which he probably later interpreted in his own way. I suspect, I don't want to say for sure, I wasn't there, but I suspect he interpreted it in his own way, did something differently from how Putin probably understood it. Then things reached a head, and Putin likely began preparing for war following Lamoshka's plan. It's not that Zelensky, well, it's clear Putin is the aggressor. Just to be precise, he started the war, but there is some kind of backstory. And Bogdan clearly knows this. Since Bogdan was the only one present, Putin shook his hand. He was present with Putin in the office during negotiations with Zelensky. So Bogdan definitely knows everything. And if he really starts talking, then I think those 40% of people that Dennis and I discussed today in Ukraine, they'll have their minds blown again.
What are the chances he'll talk, Dennis?
Well, today he's kind of announcing something timidly, sort of. I think if he does anything, it'll be the same as how information is leaked at Nabu, in portions, little by little.
Ask Dennis. Russia is declaring a ceasefire on May 8th and 9th for the safety of the parades, but at the same time, as it's written here, they're threatening strikes on the center of Kyiv. So is this actually a ceasefire, or is it more like an ultimatum?
Thank you. This is all Putin's ultimatum to Ukraine, and Zelensky is giving him his own ultimatum. You know, I don't even think about it much, because whether it's a ceasefire or not, it doesn't really solve anything on a global scale. The war needs to end. What is Putin doing with all these things? Politics. To show who's the boss here, who's the master of the house. What is Zelensky doing? Showing off, comparing their manhoods. That's what they're doing. Meanwhile, people are dying on both sides. I don't care who said what. The war must end now.
War. Ukraine states that it has not received any official request from Russia for a ceasefire. This is a real lack of communication, just playing to the public again.
I can only respond the way I am now. This is a lack of communication, playing to the public, and that's borne out by what I just said.
And you just said, Lenin, that the war needs to end right now. From your point of view, what exactly needs to happen? What, with whom, when, and how for this to take place? Or is it already completely unrealistic? Because I know people who used to say the war would last for a certain time. They named time frames, like a year, 2, 3 months. Now they say it will last forever. I hear this more and more often.
No, not forever, because men are running out. There are no men left to fight anymore. Look, here's the situation. Recently, Zelensky gave an interview and said, when a journalist, a hand-picked journalist, specifically asked him, a Ukrainian journalist, Jared Kushner and Witkoff are supposed to come to Kyiv, and negotiations are needed there. He said, it's not us who need this. They are the ones who need to come to Kyiv.
Thank you.
They need that.
Why?
Why? Because they go to Moscow. So, they need to come to Kyiv to somehow look decent in the world for the sake of peace. Of course, Kushner and Witkoff said, well then, goodbye. If that's what we need, then let him sit there alone. And they refused. But the visit had already been announced. They had already agreed that after Easter, the Americans would come to Kyiv for negotiations. Zelensky, what does this mean for me? Zelensky is deliberately disrupting their visit. Why? Why? Because he is the owner, the beneficiary, the ultimate Firepoint of this. Do you understand? That's all there is to it. If Trump's son-in-law and the special representative for ending the war are coming to see you, you can't be doing anything else. You have to drop everything, organize everything, and meet them. If I were interested in peace, if I were the president, I would be calling them non-stop. Just come, let's do something. But instead, he starts to humiliate them in such a condescending way.
But tell me this phrase, right? They need it, we don't need it.
Thank you.
Even if, you just look at relationships between people, not presidents of countries, and a person says, I don't need this, you need this. By doing that, he's clearly pushing you away and showing he doesn't want to talk to you. Of course.
Of course. You said it right. If we take politics out of it and just apply it to personal relationships, that's exactly what rudeness is. Rudeness. You do this intentionally to show the other side, for example, that you don't want to communicate with them. That's exactly what happened. As soon as I heard, I went live and said he's leaking it to the press. I told people, look, he won't come. Then people saw things never shown in Ukraine. Jared Kushner spoke at the conference 2 weeks ago, and he was there. The host asks a question. Tell us about Iran, and then please tell us about Ukraine. What are the real conditions? And he is the third person after me to say that Ukraine's GDP per capita can be tripled. The US Army can fight, and even together with the Ukrainian Army, and the Ukrainian Army with the US Army. In other words, he is describing the conditions that are on the negotiating table. An $800 billion fund. There won't be another historic chance like this to align with the United States. An ally, a strategic partner. It's like, it was a blessing in disguise. This is one of those cases. Zelensky isn't interested. Zelensky isn't interested. You see, I understand, but many people, what does Zelensky rely on? You probably want to say now that society should be outraged.
I wanted to ask you, those 40% who are undecided or want things to continue, do they see and hear this too or not? No, they don't.
They, Alexandra, are subscribed to. In Ukraine, the top social network is Telegram. That's where people get their information. Everyone has it. Everyone has their own set of Telegram channels they follow. And so the people who are subscribed to this, imagine 5 times a day they see Trump, the redhead, the old man, the senile one, all sorts of things. They're constantly criticizing Trump, Witkoff, Kushner. They ask, who is Kushner? What position does he have? Trump's son-in-law. Why do you care? He represents the interests of the US and President Trump. He could send his wife to speak on his behalf if Trump chose that. Witkoff, look, Kushner and Witkoff are both billionaires. But some Vasha sitting on a torn couch says, who are these people? Why do I need them? Because that's what a Telegram channel put in his head. Well, it's exactly the same with Putin in Russia. Some pauper is sitting there, but he has this satellite dish in his village that shows him Solovyov and Skobiva. It's all the same. I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating. The same technologies and post-Soviet mindset, which is the scariest part.
Well, here I am again, just watching the chat, yeah. So it's clear that, let's say, for example, if we're talking about the need to end the war and talking about what's happening here, naturally, those very same, let's say, 40% have a question: how do you end it? People here ask, should we just surrender to Putin?
I'll just call a person like that a nasty name. How long have we been on air? About 50 minutes. Who just suggested we surrender to Putin? I was just talking about Kushner, who mentioned a compromise on Donbass, a fund, prosperity, and so on and so on. To leave Donbass and create a free economic zone there, that's only 18% of Donbass, not Ukraine, but 18% of Donbass. Creating a free economic zone, there is not capitulation, it's not surrendering to Putin, it's about the losing side, which is bleeding, agreeing to a super compromise. I never thought, Dennis, that such a compromise was possible. When Trump was still not, I expected there would be some conditions, just разорвут две части. When I found out that this was possible, it should have been agreed to within 5 minutes. Of course, you can still twist some arms, squeeze the maximum out of it. I'd have done the same, but everyone in business gets that. But to say that this isn't suitable because obviously it's political suicide for Zelensky, I don't know.
But here's the big question. Was Putin even prepared for this? Because, to be honest, I haven't heard that Putin. He always speaks in riddles. We've discussed this with you.
You will never hear Putin. You will never hear Putin come out and say, give me this and we'll end the war tomorrow. Peskov says that, this other guy says that, Dushakov says that, something like that. I don't expect this from Putin. It's like Putin saying, I surrender, but that will never happen.
I think that Trump would gladly maybe even put some pressure on Putin, but as I understand it, he can't manage to do it.
I think he already put pressure. I think he already did. I think if such an option is possible, that's exactly what was agreed upon between Putin and Trump in Ankara. What we're discussing now, if that happened, then he already put pressure. We have a clear plan for ending the war. It's not like we're just guessing here about what goes where. There is a clear plan. That's what was approved.
Dennis, if we assume that there is no one left to fight in Ukraine, then why hasn't Putin been able to win for 5 years?
No, there were people who could fight before. But in what sense was that really having people to fight with? When 6 thugs beat you up, throw you into a van, and then send you to the front, that's not exactly what I'd call having people to fight with. Well, there are just certain calculations. And yes, if they start dragging men out of apartments, they can keep things going as they are for another year and a half. I just have one question. What happens next?
No, actually, by the way, I also wanted to ask you, Dennis, your opinion about modern warfare. Overall, it seems that today the wars we see, I'm talking about Russia and Ukraine, and also, for example, what the United States and Israel did in Iran, that is, in my opinion, today it's really not, let's say, not as effective as it might seem. Because in reality, huge amounts of money are being spent on the production of these ultra-precise missiles and so on and so on. But in fact, everything is decided by these FPV drones, which cost next to nothing but can destroy expensive weapons. And we can see this, what's happening, yes. And most importantly, it's also destroying a huge number of troops, yes.
Of course.
Putin can, I don't know, even bang his head against the wall there with the army. But the effectiveness of defense, specifically the use of drones, is much, let's say, better, more effective than anything else. And the cost price isn't that high compared to cruise missiles, relatively speaking. What do you think? How effective is modern warfare today overall? And Iran was bombed there too. But what do we see today? What picture do we see?
No, well, of course, war is no longer fought the way it was during World War II. After that, the world hasn't really fought on a large scale. Naturally, everything changes. Nothing stays the same. But yes, you're right, but just recently Stubb, the president of Finland, made a speech and also cynically stated that Ukraine is destroying 35,000 Russians a month. Thanks to drones, just as you're saying, because this is a drone war, the ratio is 1 to 5. So he's openly telling the whole world that 7,000 Ukrainian soldiers are dying every month. There are also missing persons and wounded, as you understand. That's 100,000 a year? You see, that's 100,000 a year military alone. Is that normal? Does anyone want to say that right now? I mean, yes, but it seems like everything is at a standstill when in reality Putin is slowly seizing territory. That's the truth. You can track this on maps that show it. Secondly, I'll say it again. When you're not involved there, it seems like everything is standing still. But our people are dying there every day. There are shellings, civilians dying, and we're losing infrastructure. People are losing faith in the state. The psychological state of Ukrainians today is catastrophic. Antidepressant sales are at record highs. Actually, world records. This isn't right. There will be consequences.
No, I can't argue with you here, absolutely. There's really nothing to argue about. I'm just saying that we really do see modern wars, how ineffective they are and how they're simply really aimed at destroying people. Because any day now, military robots, soldiers will appear. And then it will be completely unclear. And then really nothing can be resolved except, let's say, with a thermonuclear strike. And even then, there's a big question about whether that's even possible.
A question for Denis, if possible, a question for Denis Eliseevich. After all, the reason for corruption in Ukraine is the same as Putin's dictatorship in Russia. So why then do Ukrainians, like Russians, not want to live by the law? As an aside, is everything decided by connections and bribes, or why?
No, the person doesn't understand the nature of corruption. Thank God that something can be solved with a bribe. Otherwise, in Ukraine, the economy would have stalled. You just can't do anything. The problem is that the system is set up in such a way that some guy can sit in his office, demand a bribe from you, and create problems for you. All of this changes with changes in legislation. You remove bureaucracy, lower taxes, and eliminate the contact between people and the government. That's exactly what I'm advocating for. Ukraine is millions of officials. It's this kind of legislation, these huge tomes for every little thing. Nobody understands anything. And basically, it's a mess. And that's it.
What is your opinion on China's position? What will Trump and Putin discuss with Xi at the upcoming meetings in Beijing? Is this a new Yalta, Denis, or what?
You know, I know the meeting will happen, but I haven't really sat down and thought about what they'll be discussing there. Obviously, they'll be discussing what's happening in the world, the relations between their countries, Ukraine, Iran, Taiwan. They'll be discussing all of that. My starting point is that my country, Ukraine, has a president and he is acting wrongly. That's what I'm ready to discuss.
And what do you think, Denis? How much has Trump lost interest in Ukraine at this point, so to speak, or will he still re-engage and take new steps so that in some way this war will actually end?
Trump takes a long time to get started, but when he strikes very hard. And with Zelensky, this ultimatum that I mentioned today, it's not for no reason. After that, there will be developments. The more Zelensky or the situation drags this out, the stronger the blow will be later. It's just that, what position is Trump in right now? With all these circumstances, no matter who Zelensky is or how little Trump respects him, Ukraine is still weakening Russia. Trump needs to separate Russia from China. It's not that Trump wants war. That's definitely not true. I know that for sure. But it's not like this directly interferes with America's interests or anything like that. So if you two idiots want to kill your own people, well, I don't like it, but I'm not going to get in between you at the cost of American interests. That's how I would put it. After all, it's realpolitik.
And tell me, please, Denis, you just said, and you know this for sure, that Trump is not interested in continuing the Russia-Ukraine war. I think so too. But if someone thinks differently, why is it that Trump is fundamentally not interested in this war?
Because Trump made campaign promises, that's the first thing. Second, Trump needs to show who's in charge. So if there's an issue that no one can handle, he needs to show that he can handle it. Second, these are geopolitical interests, direct geopolitical interests.
But you just said it's because he made promises. But Zelensky also made promises, and Putin also made promises.
No, well, you understand, making a promise and not keeping it in a Soviet or post-Soviet country is normal. But in America, that won't work. That is, you will definitely be held politically accountable for this at the very least.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Tell me, please, Denis, you mentioned this when we were talking just now. You said that Zelensky and his circle have negatively influenced the Jewish issue in Ukraine and the relationship between Israel and Ukraine. Did they do this intentionally, or did it just happen that way?
No, not intentionally. You see, every nation has both scoundrels and good people. It's just a matter of proportion. In this case, it turned out that only scoundrels could make it in such a system. So the scoundrels rose to the top, representatives of that nation, but I want to tell critics of Zelensky that he doesn't identify as Jewish. And if he doesn't identify himself that way, how can others consider him as such? So calm down, relax, that's not the case. Mindich, as far as I know, is religious, but in a different way. His actions are very different. So that's a completely separate topic. I don't think it's suitable for your broadcasts. But we need to remember that there are Jews who are excellent doctors, scientists, businessmen, innovators, so you can't judge so broadly. I'm telling you again, look at the history of Ukraine. Before, the people in these positions weren't Jews. What has changed?
By the way, what you said today, you mentioned Yanukovych and someone else, that back then there were, yes, Ukrainians, there were Russians, and because of that, things weren't any better or worse. That's just how it was. But this topic is being pushed today, that it's specifically the Jews who ruined Ukraine or want to take over Ukraine, and the idea of a new Khazaria. When you just spoke now, you said, here's an example. You, Dennis, you talk based on facts in that manner. So you say there was Yanukovych, there were these people, there was another person, there were those people, so what? Well, do people actually listen to you when you say this, or do they keep pushing this convenient, I don't know why it's convenient ideology, but still?
No, they don't listen to me. This wave, first of all, is funded and has always been funded from Russia. Anti-Semitism in Ukraine, all this stuff like the heavenly Jerusalem, if you've heard that nonsense, it's all funded. And the people who promoted it in Kiev were protected by the FSB. They walked around with FSB bodyguards. So basically, all reasonable people know this, but do you understand why this is happening? Because they know that our people are the kind who, if you show them an easy enemy and explain everything simply, basically, you don't have to make any more effort. Look, see, they want to capture Ukraine. They're the ones to blame. That's it. Don't think about anything else. Don't sit and ponder. Don't dig into the reasons. It's not your job to think, we've assigned you an enemy. Go ahead.
Let's go. That's an interesting way to put it. We assigned you an enemy. Is that what you said? An easy enemy because it's a hyped up topic, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Remember the Vysotsky song called Anti-Semite?
Yes, of course.
That's pretty much how it is there.
By the way, speaking of this topic or continuing it, yes, just a few days, many people were saying, look, Volodymyr Zelensky has passed legislation regarding anti-Semitism and so on and so on. And again, just yesterday, I heard an opinion that anti-Semitism in Ukraine, well, let's say, hasn't exactly increased, but there are concerns that it might grow. Precisely in connection with Mendelkeit, and that Zelensky, while anticipating this blow and possible discontent about Mindich, yes, the so-called main thief, a Jew, yes, in order to spread this hatred accordingly, started this whole story with the law on anti-Semitism.
Yes.
What do you have to say about this?
I know for sure
that this bill sat on Zelensky's desk for many years. This is not an idea that was born yesterday. It sat there for many years. Why it was signed now, I don't know. It says people can be imprisoned, but no one will be. I'll reassure everyone, including anti-Semites, no one will be jailed. Just as no one was imprisoned before, no one will be tomorrow. So believe me, it doesn't affect anything.
And then, well, what Dennis asked you, Dennis, if it doesn't affect anything, was this somehow a reason to show that we're not an anti-Semitic state?
I don't know the motivation, honestly, but it did more harm than good. Because, you know, as I said on my stream, a lot of outraged people showed up across all my channels. I said, if this bothers you at all, it means you're either a latent or an open anti-Semite. Because, for example, if there's no nationality I dislike, then I don't care when some law is passed. If this upset you and you dislike it, then you're an anti-Semite. I can't explain it otherwise. This won't affect anything, but it caused irritation and got people writing. The people I mentioned began asking, when will there be a law to protect Ukrainians? Well, that's just demagoguery, since Ukraine is a country of Ukrainians and Jews are a minority everywhere. I'm for the protection of any minorities, Hungarians in Ukraine, Armenians, it doesn't matter to me. I'm against all of this, you know, racism, xenophobia, and everything else. But unfortunately, most people think differently.
I also remembered Gennady Balashov. Well, when he said, if you remember, Dennis, when Gennady was with us, Gennady Viktorovich, he said someone called in, I think, and asked him about anti-Semites. He just shrugged and said, well, I don't really know. I guess I'm also a casual anti-Semite. I don't even remember when that started. It was very sincere, very warm.
If you had known Gennady before all these events, you would now think that you were talking to a different Gennady. But in the last 2 years, he started making statements that he never made before. When he was in Kiev, he always passionately defended Jews and spoke out against anti-Semitism. Everybody knows that? Yeah?
He was mostly joking just to lighten the mood, so to speak. Since we mentioned Armenians, Dennis, for some reason, I'm not sure why, maybe it's just me, it seemed like there was a lot of fuss about Volodymyr Zelensky's visit to Yerevan and his meeting with Fico. By the way, it's interesting, Fico seems to be the only one meeting with Zelensky. Well, at least among European leaders, he's the only one who apparently agreed to come to the victory parade in Moscow, kind of a supporter of Vladimir Putin. And this story with the European Union comes up again. Some people are strongly against it. Others are demanding Ukraine's admission. What can you say about the visit, let's call it that, of Volodymyr Zelensky to Yerevan, to Armenia?
I already told you he went there to sell weapons. He came there to sell weapons, to act as a sales manager at Firepoint. But let me tell you something else. How much this theory about Fico being pro-Russian, Fico being Putin's agent, has fallen apart. And now Fico says that he won't go to that parade at all, and he's no longer against Ukraine joining the European Union. So now Fico has become pro-Zelensky, Zelensky's agent Pereo Brucha. No, he's simply acting in Slovakia's interests. That's all. And he wisely didn't want to quarrel with Russia, because for tiny Slovakia, which is dependent, to quarrel with Russia is not a great move for Slovakia.
The same way.
Just like Orban. The same way.
Just like Orban, yes, back in the day.
Well, of course.
People were convinced
That everyone must adore Ukraine and Ukrainians. And don't even think about 99%. It has to be 100%. 99% is not enough.
Interesting. You said that everyone must adore Ukrainians. That's a fact. But to adore someone, Dennis dear, there needs to be some reason, right?
And Finsa refused to go, right? I didn't see that.
Well, he said something like he would go before the parade. He had announced before that he would go to the parade. Something kind of changed there.
Because I heard that at first they didn't want to let him in. I think the Finns, not the Finns, but the Baltic countries didn't want to let his plane through. Well, it seems like they apparently agreed. I don't know.
Well, yes, Babiš was also in Yerevan, the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic. So,
Dennis, you said that I talked, yes, with another Balashov. Yes. I talked to a more lost one. We talked more. To a weaker one. How was he different?
it probably wouldn't look good to discuss this on air, but when he came under such pressure, it couldn't help but have an effect and bring about change. For example, he supported Biden during the election campaign, so he came under a certain influence. Anyone who has followed his actions and statements for a long time will say, this isn't like him. I'm saying this as a positive for him, not as a negative.
He was quite a tough leader. When was that? And I'll never forget.
When I saw it, well, it turned out to be from a long time ago. If you look at the video, it's a dedication to the monument to Dmitry Gordon. Of course, it's a unique thing. Honestly, at first I thought it was completely serious, but still, what a skill, right? It's like a ready-made stand-up routine. You could just take it straight to the stage. I even told Gennady Viktorovich about it. I was really amazed at how precisely he laid everything out, just step by step, and honestly, it was insanely funny, friends. I recommend it to everyone. Gennady Balashev's channel, I think it's still up. Be sure to find that video. A dedication, yes, to the monument of Dmitry Gordon. It's really very funny, and most importantly, it's still relevant to this day.
Is it still relevant, Dennis?
Well, for a certain number of people, yes.
This question is for you. From your point of view, Zelensky should have signed the Minsk agreements. There wouldn't have been a war. But Boris Johnson came and told Zelensky to flush the Minsk agreements down the toilet. Zelensky fell for it, or do you think this is another made-up scenario, Dennis, for those who just swallow whatever is written?
Boris Johnson didn't come after the Minsk agreements. He came after the Istanbul talks during the war. The Minsk agreements were pre-war dialogue, the Normandy format, all of that. That was when Merkel and Macron were still involved. Those were the Minsk agreements. The person got everything mixed up. And about last time, about the Minsk agreements, I'll tell you this. Everything was bad. I didn't like the Minsk agreements at all. But they were definitely better than war. No, nothing is worse than war. And I will never back down from this position because everything else can still somehow be fixed. When your people are killed and your territory is taken, you can rebuild infrastructure, but you can never bring people back. And restoring other people's faith in the state, in the country, will be very difficult. So many have left. How will you get them to return to Ukraine? They brought in Africans. They decided we'll bring them in.
By the way, speaking of those who left, Dennis, people who left Ukraine, they might want to come back someday. How will that happen if it does? And will these people really return home?
No. For them to come back or even consider it, we need to offer conditions that are much better than where they live now, meaning in the countries of the European Union. That's what I'm suggesting to do. What are these conditions? Unprecedented personal freedom, unprecedented freedom of speech, the lowest taxes in Europe. In other words, opportunities for a person to fulfill themselves. Why should someone pay 20% taxes in Poland if they can come to Ukraine and pay just 5% taxes there?
Well, do you think it's possible to create such conditions for people so that they don't leave?
Of course, of course.
Do we need a new president, or how can we create those conditions for them? Yes?
A different one. I'm just telling you briefly. Of course, a different president. It should be a president who immediately knows what to do, an ideologue who is able to give a speech that inspires people. When you say we are the shield of Europe, you constantly mumble about the war. By the way, you know, there's a myth now that supposedly people want a military president and to put military people in all the positions. That's just a myth. It's just a myth created to bring such people to power. In reality, people are tired of militarism and don't want it. Everyone understands now war is bad. The grandmothers who lived through World War II were right. War is bad and must not be allowed. And since our foolish generation didn't understand this, well, I personally understood, but Zelensky didn't. Unfortunately, we had to experience it ourselves, and now we need to learn from it. People want reforms, even if they're unsure about the details or dislike those involved. They still want change, a different life. Only those who benefit want war. I used to profit from it. By the way, I'll say this separately right away. People whose mental state has changed because of the war, I set them aside. These are separate people, and I don't judge them at all, and I don't even want to discuss them. But if you understand the situation, if you're able to think clearly, then you realize that war must never be allowed to happen again.
I have a question for you. Look, people are leaving Ukraine, those who managed to leave, especially young men who, God forbid, don't want to end up in this terrible situation. Some Ukrainians who have Jewish roots are leaving for Israel, but there's a war there too. Why do they choose that war? You know, it's terrible to say, but it's like one war is better than another. Why?
But in fact, that's what many people are choosing. That's what many have actually chosen. I'll explain why. Because in Israel, a person's life comes first, but in Ukraine, it's just statistics, just like in Russia, really.
Will you go into politics when you return to Ukraine after the war? That's what our viewers are asking. And let me clarify, do you consider yourself not in politics right now? Thank you.
Well, I consider myself a political figure, if you can call it that, given modern technologies, but there are no elections or political process. If you're asking if I want to, definitely not, definitely not. Well, I didn't want to go on air either, but the situation required it.
Tell me, please, Niz, may I ask, why does Dennis say he wouldn't want to go into politics in Ukraine when he returns home?
You see, Ukrainian politics, it's... I wouldn't even say it's dirty. No politics is clean, but this is a special kind of politics. But for me to sit in a studio and argue with some idiot who serves some oligarch or some clan, that means lowering myself to that level. Honestly, I'm interested in other things in life, and that's just not my style. I mean, bowing to someone, showing up somewhere just because you have to, that's not for me. I went to my office only when I felt it was necessary, not just because someone told me to. Не может служить, короче говоря.
Well, look, Dennis, many people consider you a politician. You say that you didn't want to go on air, but nevertheless you did. And in a short period of time, you gained a huge number of subscribers. You have a huge following. You have a huge audience. So maybe if you go into politics, everything will work out just as easily for you, and you will gain, let's say, an audience. Specifically, let's say in Ukraine, it will really allow you to solve some more significant issues. I mean, specific issues. Since this comes so easily to you, in my opinion.
No, because I come with ideas of capitalism and freedom, and I'm offering this in a post-communist society. And it definitely won't be like that. It definitely won't be like that.
I was about to ask Dennis if he follows what's happening in the Middle East.
Well, before we get to that, I want to ask, do you often allow yourself, Denis Eliseevich, to speak favorably about the American president? What are you hoping for, and why do you like him so much? There are lots of comments about Donald Trump saying he's an idiot, a clown, and so on.
There's no ulterior motive. I've supported him consistently for a long time before, during, and after the elections. And I have no ulterior motive here. I support the one who today embodies common sense in the whole world, who can have a very serious influence on it. If it's Milei, Trump, or Musk, then I support them. If tomorrow there's another figure, I'll support them too.
But you just mentioned Milei, Trump, and Musk. Why? I want to ask you, why Milei and why Musk?
Well, first of all, they openly state Milei is a libertarian, and secondly, both Milei and Musk openly declare their anti-globalist stance. Openly, very openly, they expose and discuss the issues that matter most in the world, which I also consider to be the main problems. They aren't afraid to call things by their proper names and discuss topics others avoid or find embarrassing. Durov, by the way, I can add Durov to this group as well.
You mean Pavel Durov?
Yes, yes.
And Evgeny Chichevarkin.
I despise him.
Why?
Because it's a sly-ass man. I was going to say boy, but he's older than me, who thinks he's smarter than everyone else, who supposedly spoke out against Putin, although at first he supported him and then he was against him. And during the Orange Revolution here in Ukraine, he tried to push himself into a minister's position. I strongly supported this since Chichevarkin was voicing the same economic ideas that are close to me. He called himself a libertarian. He was against Putin. Everything seemed good. Now, this full-scale war has happened. Chichevarkin supports Ukraine. Huge thanks to him. Ukrainians are very grateful to him, but he also actively supports Zelensky. He's just complimentary towards Zelensky. And that's when I also noticed hypocrisy there. The same kind of hypocrisy that Kasparov and Khodorkovsky have. So you don't like your own dictator, but you like our dictator. If I dislike one dictator, I dislike them all.
Any of them?
I dislike Ayatollahs, Zelensky, and Lukashenko. But it can't be that I like this one and I don't like that one, because this one supposedly takes down a dictator, and Chichevarkin literally shows love. This isn't an honest opposition, it's a hypocritical one. Support Ukraine and Ukrainians, honor and praise to you. I've praised you before, and if you check my channel, I've spoken positively about him several times. But when I saw this openly, when he knows how the draft offices works, Firepoint, all the corruption, political persecution. So in Ukraine it's allowed, but in Russia it's not. That's how it turns out.
Maybe they don't fully believe it. Maybe they don't fully believe it. No, I'm being honest. I would really like it if this didn't happen either. But unfortunately, especially after talking with you, of course, and given what's really happening today, I mean, the facts that exist, you can't get away from them. So if they mention Vova on those recordings, it's clear which Vova they're talking about. And then, well, we all understand perfectly well, we're not idiots, we all understand perfectly well, this is the closest circle of Volodymyr Zelensky and Mindich and all those guys and Yermak. Well, who else could it be?
But Denis Eliseevich just now, in his own manner, Denis made one argument that has no counter-argument. Dennis just said, when you asked about Chichvarkin, who was also on our radio, Dennis said, you either don't like dictators and don't accept them.
I agree.
Certainly, or you accept them, but it turns out one is accepted and the other isn't.
There are good and bad dictators depending on the situation.
Well, yes.
I think,
That these people don't consider him a dictator at all, Zelensky.
of course they don't. Then it turns out they're idiots because Zelensky fits all the criteria of a dictator and does exactly the same things for which, as Chichvarkin says, he personally suffered. And Chichvarkin was treated more mercifully. He still got a huge amount of money, maybe not as much as Euroset is worth, but he's no saint either. When you were allowed to leave with a couple $100 million, you know, Zelensky would never let you do that.
You know, what amazes me is something else. You were just asking Dennis about Evgeny Chichvarkin. And so in order to somehow offend us, you know, someone writes, does Chichvarkin even know who Denis Eliseevich is? First of all, he does. I'm sure of it. Second, what's the question's purpose? Is it meant to highlight someone's importance or lack of it? I think the problem with people is that when they run out of arguments, they start saying all sorts of nonsense. I want to ask you, Dennis, just 1 second. There was a very interesting question. I've been sent this question several times already, like, ask Dennis, so I definitely will. Oh, well, what's that here? No, that's not interesting.
Here are the questions. Literally, well, it's not exactly on topic, but I'll read it anyway. Dennis, do you think that after Zelensky is out of power in Ukraine, there could be filtration points like in Sheremetyevo to filter returnees to decide whether they deserve to live in Ukraine or not?
Of course, but let me reassure you right away, Zelensky will not be in power in Ukraine after the war. They won't just set up filtration points like in airports. They'll build them somewhere in eastern Ukraine. They're already announcing it. They'll be selecting people. You're good, you're bad. So, in the occupied territory, a person has no choice but to take a Russian passport just to survive. He may hate Putin, but his options are either death or surviving with a Russian passport and trying to act. They've already been called traitors. How does that make sense?
The strange thing about the question here is that the person is asking after Zelensky has been replaced.
It depends on who comes to power. We don't know who it will be.
Of course.
In Ukraine so far, each subsequent president has been worse than the previous one. Do you understand the situation?
It's hard to imagine, yes.
Many years have passed since 1991, Dennis. Dennis, tell me honestly, many years have passed since 1991, and by now everyone around has already been blamed for Ukraine's troubles. Maybe it's time to tell Ukrainians who's really to blame for their troubles? And tell me, Dennis, how many Ukrainians actually came out to defend you personally, considering that you are truly a Ukrainian patriot?
Well, when my mom was detained by the SBU, dozens of people came to the court. Dozens of people came to court, and I appreciate each one. Despite the whole situation, despite everything. So yes, people came to defend. And as for 1991, of course, only we are to blame. I have never blamed anyone else. Because they say that Russia didn't let Ukraine become successful. Well, if you think about it, did Russia create Firepoint? Zelensky is the latest example. Did Russia impose draconian taxes in Ukraine? The bureaucracy, the state apparatus? No. All of that was done by Ukraine itself, by the hands of idiots we elect. Before, this was only a matter for officials because they had leverage. And today, they're the first ones to blame. After 35 years of wrong votes, maybe it's time to reconsider.
At the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump ironically stated, I am a dictator. Continuation, but sometimes I need to be a dictator. It's just common sense. That's the point Eliseevich is making.
Well, they want to latch onto something about Trump, latch onto his words. Well, it's obvious. If you don't like Trump, I'm not forcing anyone. Look, someone comes and says something wrong. I'm not forcing you to like him. Thank you. I'm expressing my point of view.
But look, Dennis, I was just thinking about dictators, for example. Stalin was also a dictator, right?
Of course.
However, many people still believe that it was thanks to Stalin that the Soviet Union won the Great Patriotic War. People went on the attack with Stalin's name on their lips. Well, obviously not everyone, but they did go on the attack with Stalin's name. And even, let's say, the victims of the repressions cried when he died. That's how far it goes. Yes, maybe a dictatorship really is necessary in wartime.
No, it's not necessary. By the way, my great-great-grandfather was repressed by Stalin and later rehabilitated posthumously. Look, Stalin was a tyrant. In Russia, over the last 15 years, they've been recreating the cult of Stalin. He wasn't liked either. Putin worked hard for this, probably because he knew where things could lead. They even started putting up monuments to him and airing broadcasts.
Just like some places are already named after Dzerzhinsky.
Yes, he's a criminal, he's a criminal. In my opinion, he's just as much a scoundrel as Hitler. And if people are like that, well, what should I call a person who declares himself a slave and some kind of microbe? If a victim of repression says that, by the way, this is partly what we're seeing now, it's some kind of Stockholm syndrome, and we're seeing this now in Ukraine as well. So Zelensky didn't protect them, Zelensky punished them, but still they're like, well, maybe he's not that bad. Who else if not Zelensky? These are the same narratives as in Russia. Who else but Putin?
I was just about to say it's the same thing.
Well, the main thing, I'll say it right away, the main thing that wins people over and what everyone says when they talk about Zelensky is that Zelensky didn't leave in the first days of the war. Because you see,
look, Russia declared,
and Zelensky was there, he didn't abandon his people and so on.
Thank you. Yes, he said, I don't need a taxi, but what's this?
Yes, everyone remembers that, and let's be cynical, everyone practically worships that.
No, that's already outdated. I don't know who everyone is, and there are many jokes about it. Now things are officially coming to light in the Verkhovna Rada Commission regarding what happened in that bunker. Drinking wine, playing table tennis, when somewhere someone picked up a weapon or just stayed under Russian occupation and under fire, that's no great heroism. Being protected by special forces isn't really heroic, that's just his job.
By the way, speaking of Denis Eliseevich, the fact that you live in Florida and you chose Florida because you like the Trumps and so on. And I want to ask Eliseevich, is it apparently those who live here probably, or on the contrary in Ukraine, why? Oh yes, by the way, about your mom, there was a comment that the person who wrote it was in court when your mom had that problem. He wrote that there were a lot of people there, so Denis is telling the absolute truth. Denis is known and loved, and that's why people came. Well, after that, of course, it was mostly nasty things. If you have an Israeli passport, we'll skip that. We've already been over that 100 times.
Tabaka writes a lot.
Oh, right. I don't know if Denis even knows Tabaka at all.
And many people say that you somehow offended Tabaka. And accordingly, if you offend Tabaka, you immediately get a bunch of haters.
Thank you. I don't know what this is about. Let them write to me.
By the way, Denis, do you know each other?
Yes, we know each other.
I won't ask any further. Tell me why. It's clear why there are so few people on your channel and on our channel, why they don't come, who actually lives in Ukraine today.
Does it not matter that I have 70% of my viewers physically in Ukraine? You mentioned both channels.
No doubt.
You have a channel that's clearly aimed at the post-Soviet diaspora in different countries. Ukrainians are likely counted in your metrics, though I haven't seen them. It all makes sense, of course.
I'm pretty sure, and right now, a lot of us Ukrainians are watching. I don't
mean...
You're fans.
Well, that's first of all. Secondly, yes, already more than 1,000 people are watching, and I wanted to say something else to Denis. I mean guests. As I understand it, do you invite Ukrainian guests from Ukraine or not?
Yeah, I've only had Ukrainians on my channel.
Is that so? For example, we in turn can hardly invite people who live in Russia today because it's really dangerous. We know people who can really speak out. We understand what they're thinking, but we're even afraid to ask them questions. Some questions could provoke something and in the end people could suffer. But what about you? How do you communicate with people who live in Ukraine? Aren't you afraid that if you ask one question too many, something might happen afterwards?
No, look, if we're talking about guests on the channel, they don't live in Ukraine. First of all, I rarely have guests, very rarely. Secondly, they don't live in Ukraine because obviously they are opposition-minded. But people from Ukraine do watch.
All right, I understand. Well,
I want to ask you something, if that's okay. Look, we once invited guests from Ukraine. I mean, those who live in Ukraine, right? There were Elena Kurbanova, Ivan Yakovin, Roman Cymbalyuk. At some point when we started having Gennady Balashov and then you, well, I'll be honest with you, they don't say go to hell, but they don't talk to us anymore. And even if we invite them, Latinina?
When she started appearing with us.
Latinina, yes. What do you think? Why?
Well, obviously, they immediately see some kind of catch in it. So kind of like, well, this is a propagandist. This is a propagandist. Right away, well...
For example, Roman Cymbalyuk, he said that even if, let's say, I completely disagree with what you, for example, are saying, but if you keep inviting me, I'll still come in order to, let's say, present my point of view. Well, for that very community you mentioned, yes, for people from the former Soviet Union living in Canada and the United States. So the community that's watching us today. But lately, it seems like there's not much desire to come out and talk. At least, as far as I understand, people aren't eager to do so. For example, I would gladly ask him myself. Well, again, I don't even know if, for example, you asked him about the current situation with Volodymyr Zelensky, how truthfully he would be able to answer, as far as I know.
Even if he wanted to. I'll answer for him. They steal, but for the sake of victory.
Did you say they steal just to win?
Yes.
They don't fight, they steal for the sake of victory.
They steal? Yes, they steal. I mean, it used to be a joke that they steal, but for the sake of victory. That's how we, in our opposition circles, well, used to mock, you could say, the side that serves the authorities. And today this narrative is real. Because after Firepoint, you know, Nina Sokolova, if you know her, and others, they came out and said, yes, everything is bad. But do you know why these people stood out like that? Everyone is against Zelensky, and why are there investigations and leaks? Because Ukraine started seriously bombing Russia, and Russia doesn't like it, so it activated its networks. That's what they say. I mean, they steal, but for the sake of victory. Russia is burning, Perm is burning, Tuops is burning. What don't you like?
It's interesting. Stealing for the sake of victory is cool, Dennis. They wrote to you that I live in Ukraine, and I'm subscribed to Denis Eliseevich's channel. And there are a lot of people like that in Ukraine. By the way, how dangerous is it in Ukraine? Don't take this as a provocative question. To be one of your subscribers.
Being a subscriber is completely safe. In Ukraine, it's dangerous if you express your point of view, one that the authorities don't like, and do so publicly. That's what's dangerous.
To what extent does what you're doing on your channel today, and your channel is growing like crazy, interfere with those who support the war in Ukraine?
I'm interfering with them a lot. Well, I'm in a rather unenviable position right now, so I'm interfering with the authorities and with everyone else. Well, I have what you might call a principled stance. I started broadcasting this from Kyiv. It's not like I left and started from a safe distance. That's the point, which many people don't know or understand.
That's really important. Please discuss this, since people are saying you left, so it's easy to speak from there.
Well, first of all, let me say it again. I started broadcasting from Kyiv, and I left because problems started once I began broadcasting. Second, even if I or someone else had left and started broadcasting, it's absolutely normal to ensure your own safety in order to be able to speak. And this person wants to say that I should have ended up in a coffin or in prison, and then that person would be better off, or life in Ukraine would be better, or then there would be no Firepoint. They will never answer this question for you because the answer is simple. They don't like me. I annoy them.
Yes, that's interesting. You said they don't like me, and it's clear you annoy them. You annoy them simply by existing, Dennis, just by being there. You moved to America, here you run your blog, and it's, so to speak, extremely popular. That's already enough for you to annoy people and for them to hate you. Dennis, did you want to say something? Sorry about that.
No, I just wanted to use Alexei Navalny as an example. Yeah, I mean, well, there's probably not much more to say here. It's clear. So, I mean, that fate could very well await Denis Eliseevich in Ukraine. Why is this necessary? Most importantly, who will be better off because of it?
I want to make clear I have no intention of becoming Navalny.
No, I'm talking about fate.
The channel is monetized, your channel, our channel, probably making money off the name Zelensky. How do you feel about such an accusation, and how will you respond to it that you're building your career and capital on Zelensky's name?
I've lost over $500,000 because of Zelensky's name, and I'm at peace with it. That's not even counting all the problems my family has faced. So, I started the channel as someone who was financially better off than 90% of Ukraine's population. And now people are going to tell me that I started the channel to make money? Well, I don't really want to say any numbers on air, but you definitely wouldn't be called a smart person after that. Let's say if you knew the numbers, the percentage of business, the TV channel that was in Ukraine, and the YouTube channel. My YouTube channel has 2 million views. 1,000 views from Ukraine, do they realize that's worth less than $1? Under $1 per 1,000 views, the channel averages 2 million views monthly. What is there to talk about?
By the way, these numbers were mentioned by Gennady Balashov. He has talked more than once about what he lost and how he lost it. And you remember, Dennis, what state Gennady was in last time, don't you?
I remember, but I also want to tell you something else. And if someone was making money from this, so what? Did someone steal from someone else? Tell me, please, why is it that in America there's someone like Mr. Beast, the top blogger, right? He makes entertainment content and that's considered normal. But in this environment, even if someone went live purely to make money, that's just money YouTube pays for ads people choose to place here. That means the person generates interest and their work is rewarded. What's the problem? But that's the Soviet mindset. Do you understand what I mean? The issue is that someone is making money, but how exactly are they making it? That's the real problem.
You know what's interesting? Let me add to that, Dennis. For example, let's take, as they say in English, as an example that you live in the United States today and you're doing something good for Ukraine and making money from it. So what? I mean, you're doing something good for Ukraine.
Let this person answer that question for themselves. Some people who moved abroad chose to earn a living as bloggers. What's wrong or criminal about that? Firepoint is of no interest. Making money off the war is fine. But if someone makes money on YouTube, well, you see, that's it. There's nothing more to discuss.
What did you call it today? Soviet-style thinking, right? That's how you put it.
Yes, Soviet-style thinking, purely Soviet-style thinking.
Dennis, you were around for the Soviet Union, right?
Yes, I was around for the Soviet Union. I mean, I was born at the end of 1987, practically in 1988.
So you barely remember it then?
Well, I still remember some things.
Are you serious right now?
Yes. Well, for example, I went through a major tragedy. I had a serious surgery when I was 3 years old in a burn center. I, for example, remember a Soviet hospital. It somehow stayed in my memory.
Thank you.
I remember kindergarten. Well, believe me, 92, 93 were different from 80, 90, 89. Of course, of course.
Thank you. I just thought you can be blamed for anything. That's what they wrote. Well, it's interesting. Alexander seems to have some unhealthy fixation on the late Balashov. He doesn't ask anything specific, but he keeps bothering Dennis. It doesn't seem like anything serious, but somehow it's always inappropriate. Do you think my questions to you about Gennady Balashov are inappropriate, Dennis? If so...
I understand why you're asking, so they make sense to me. They make sense to me.
I worked with this person for quite a long time, and I remember him as a smart, bright person who suddenly passed away one day, and I found out about it on a stream. It would be strange if I were just a block of wood and didn't remember the person, especially since you and I met thanks to Gennady. I think that's very understandable. I think that's called humanity. What people are writing, that's called something else, quite the opposite. Antony, some things for me, this is also that Soviet mentality that Denis Eliseevich spoke about so well today. I can't tell you, but thank you. I'm grateful to Balashov. I'll mention his name again, that thanks to Gennady, you and I met, and today there's an opportunity for you to speak with a person who first loves Ukraine, who second tells the truth about Ukraine, and third, we don't have an equivalent and I don't want one. Thank you so much for today, Dennis.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Thank you. Good luck. Thank you.